When I first got my driver's license, I was probably 16 or so. I was prepared. I had been working for years, odd jobs, washing floors. I actually was delivered newspapers. I carried groceries home for people. And I'd saved up enough money to get a used car. I'd been waiting for that day. That day I bought a Dodge Rambler with a few more dents in it than that one. And I was assured that it would run. I was. And so the first day that I had it, that night on a cold, snowy winter evening, I talked my friends into letting me drive them in my new car. Well, no sooner had we gone about 20 miles driving, my car broke down on a remote stretch of road in an area we really were not too familiar with. And you have to remember, of course, this is before cell phones. It changes our world having cell phones in that way. One of my friends looked at me and said, well, what do we do now? He said a few other things also that I can't say from the pulpit. But we popped the hood, and a couple of them pretended to twist a few knobs, play with a few wires, and I knew their vain attempt to impress each other with a mechanical macho-ness would amount to absolutely nothing. And again, the refrain, what do we do now? One of my friends insisted we wait for the police. Eventually the police would come and drive us and help us and drive us home. And my thought immediately turned to the fact that when the car died, so did the heat. And we left the doors open while playing inside the hood, and that led me to believe if we waited too long, we might freeze to death. And again, the refrain, well, what do we do now? And so I suggested that we go out and walk until we find a payphone or someone's house that didn't look too creepy, you know. And I'm not quite sure how we determined what houses were creepy or not, but, you know, it was an intuitive thing that we had. And my friends expressed numerous concerns. We could freeze to death. We could get lost. How would we know how long it will take before we find something? There could be a wild pack of werewolves that eat us or something, you know. There's always something. There's always something. Yeah? I said, I would rather die doing something trying to save us than die sitting around waiting for somebody else to come save us. Now, sometimes there are events in our country that make me ask, what do we do now? Recently, there have been a few events. I could talk for hours on probably each of them. I promise you I won't. But there have been a few events in our nation that have made me stop and take stock about what our values as a country and humanity are as a whole. So one such event I saw seen on television was of white adults and their children screaming, just screaming in anger at a bus of refugee children, telling them to go home. It reminded me of the 1960s pictures of white Americans screaming at African American children protesting desegregation. I think it's kind of interesting how in both pictures they use the flag almost as weapons. And I think that's, you know, and as if our flag represents violence. When we look back on those pictures of the 1960s, I've often wondered, you know, what do these people now, 50 years later, I wonder what they think about what they did. Whether they've changed. And wonder if within that question there might be a clue as to what will cause us to change, and hopefully maybe not 50 years later. Well, one such person was Hazel Bryan Massery, who is seen here shouting at Elizabeth Eckford, one of the first 9 students to integrate the Little Rock High School in Arkansas. And Massery, after a few years after this, did some discernment on her own, stating that her hatred really came from comments that she heard consistently from her parents and not based on the situation itself. And she actually felt remorse and contacted Eckford to apologize for her actions. I think that's a good first step. And I think a great second step, in her life she worked with young black mothers-to-be and minority students in part to make amends for her actions. She appeared in speeches with Eckford and even on the Oprah Winfrey show with the students commemorating the 40th anniversary of the integration of the high school. But eventually, Eckford and Mastery had a falling out. And Eckford said, and I quote, "She wanted me to be cured, to be over it, and for this not to go on. She wanted me to be less uncomfortable so she wouldn't feel responsible anymore," end quote. We always own our own actions and our inactions, and we are always responsible for the consequences that follow. Our responsibilities never end. Our actions and inactions while we are alive will affect not only us, but our descendants, generation upon generation still to come. Just as we are still responsible for the actions made by the European settlers and how they dealt with the indigenous peoples of this country, just as we are still responsible for the consequences of this country making the decision to enslave people of color and then allow the Jim Crow laws to last as long as they did, and now to allow the school-to-prison pipeline to continue and the war on drugs affecting people of color. Just as we are still responsible for the consequences of our government's decisions to overthrow governments supporting and as well supporting brutal dictatorships in Central America to support American business interests. Only by looking at the larger picture and learning from and understanding those who are struggling can we come to grips with our past and our present. Now, I saw this very interesting movie this weekend, The Giver. Anybody see that this weekend? Wow, no. Wow. It was a pretty crowded theater. I thought maybe one of you might have been there. I'll give it maybe. It was an okay movie. I give it a 6 out of 10 stars on my movie rating list. But I do think it was a really poignant point that it made. I'm not giving anything away here, really. All the members of this society had no memory of the past at all. And due at least in part to that, it left them emotionless. Now, the protagonist's goal was to get past a certain barrier which would release all the memories to the people. So please don't ask me for a scientific explanation about how that's even possible, okay? It's a science fiction movie, so think metaphorically on this one. But we do have to cross certain barriers to experience emotions and empathy for others. So what are the barriers that hold us back? The barrier that tells us that we are separate from other human beings, some on a line on a map, or others with lines in our head, or drawing a line in the sand. The barrier that tells us that we are inherently better than other human beings. The barrier that tells us difference is less than. The barrier that tells us to fear other human beings and differences. Only when we break through those barriers and are willing to see every other person as just as worthy, only then can we begin to understand their pain, their joy, their sufferings, their hopes. Only when we break through our barriers and see ourselves as part of the larger world can we truly see ourselves, our pain, our joy, our suffering, our hopes. Only when we break through those barriers can we begin to stand on the side of love and truly be with the others. Standing on the side of love. Many of us have heard the phrase, many of us have sung the song, we will sing it in a few minutes here. But what exactly does it mean? So I thought I would let the people who organized it tell you.
Standing on the Side of Love is a community of people united in the common belief that love is the ultimate guiding force of our world, and that we are all compelled to speak out against injustice. We are seekers and uniters, using our voices in solidarity with those who are marginalized. In some circles, we're known as the Love People. We advocate for migrant justice, marriage equality, an end to anti-Muslim bigotry, and full inclusion for all people. We are connected through Standing on the Side of Love, an interfaith public advocacy campaign whose mission is to harness love's power to stop oppression. The campaign is sponsored by the Unitarian Universalist Association, a liberal faith denomination that welcomes all people. But our movement includes people of many faiths, and some whose only proclaimed faith is that of love. Our campaign elevates compassionate voices to influence public attitudes and policy. We accomplish this by educating people on crucial issues so they can in turn become advocates themselves, encouraging people to communicate directly with decision makers, and promoting interfaith partnerships. Standing on the Side of Love is a campaign of faith in action. Our signature yellow shirts, banners, and signs proclaim love loudly. By showing up in this coordinated fashion, we offer bold visibility, positive messaging, and the opportunity to put forth our inclusive vision into the world. Wherever you come from, however you found us, open your heart to the idea of finding safe harbor in our community. A community united in education, action, service, and a vision for a world transformed through the power of love.
I am on the side of caring for others who are struggling. These children who are on our border, who we saw these people protesting against, often do not have anyone to help them. In this case, unlike the larger immigration question, these children are coming here from countries that are filled with violence and poverty. They are not coming here looking for work. They are coming here looking just to survive. Can you imagine how bad it must be in order to send your child alone away from your home? Can you imagine how bad it must be for a child to have to leave their home alone and travel alone? These children are being forced to flee are the consequences of, due to the consequences of many actions and many people, including leaders in their own countries. And as I indicated before, whether with good or bad intentions, many of the problems in these Central American countries have been exacerbated by actions by our country, that our country has taken over the centuries. But whatever the reason, these children are here. And I've had many people say to me, Jay, but we have so many problems here already. We have so many at-risk children here already. We have so many children here already in our own community that are suffering from poverty and violence. Why would we take on more children? I do think that's a fair question. But I do think it's also a damning question. It states that we know that we don't take care for our own children as we should. It doesn't have to be an either-or. We have to ask ourselves, what are our values? And particularly, what are our values around caring for children? Are our values compassion or cruelty? Are our values inclusion or exclusion? Are our values love or hate? My religious values call us to help these children. Just as America sent countless Jewish children to their death during World War II by not accepting them into this country, so too would we be condemning these children to death if we do not accept them. So what do we do now? At a minimum, we should follow the 14th Amendment of our Constitution, which states with quite precision, and I quote, "Nor shall any state deprive any person," it doesn't say citizen, it says person, "deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person equal protection of the law." Any person, and children are people. This is the minimum, just the minimum, that many would abandon. We must end deportations now. If we value children, we should end them. If we value children, we should do everything in our power to keep families together by no longer deporting non-citizen parents of citizen children. If we value children, we should make sure the DREAM Act is finalized by our government. And finally, if we are to live out our values, value of compassion, the values of hospitality, the values of loving our neighbor, values of standing up for the most vulnerable in our midst, we must take responsibility for these children. We must not abandon them. They are our children. They are all our children. And that speaks to the children that live in this community as well, whether it be funding for schools or health care or mental health issues. We need to take care of our children. President Kennedy foresaw, well, probably not in detail all of this, but he foresaw the bigger picture in 1961. He proposed an alliance for progress, which was to help strengthen the lives of Central Americans. And it's always great to quote President Kennedy. I can't do his accent, though. We propose to complete the revolution of the Americas, to build a hemisphere where all people can hope for a suitable standard of living, and all can live out their lives in dignity and in freedom. To achieve this goal, political freedom must accompany material progress. Let us once again transform the American continent into a vast crucible of revolutionary ideas and efforts, a tribute to the power of the creative energies of free men and women, an example to all the world that liberty and progress walk hand in hand. Let us once again awaken our American Revolution until it guides the struggles of people everywhere, not with an imperialism of force or fear, but the rule of courage and freedom and hope for the future of humanity. End quote. Good intention, but ultimately flawed, with a lack of any reform, particularly land reform, limited resources and focus due to the Vietnam War, and money is diverted to American business interests. This dream never came true. The ironic thing, of course, was that if it had succeeded and we did work in partnership with Central American countries, we probably would not have these unaccompanied children here now in the United States. But that was then, and this is now. So what do we do now? Well, we have to do something to save the soul of this country. And the first thing you can do is today you can join me downtown Davenport this afternoon at 3 o'clock at the Irish Immigrant Statue and show your support for these children at an interfaith rally entitled, of course, Love Without Borders. Secondly, you can join our social justice team's immigration project so we can combine our efforts as a congregation and as well with Quad Cities Interfaith, who we work with for effective change. Unitarian Universalism asks us to do something rather than to just sit by, waiting, hoping for something to save us. Unitarian Universalism rather asks us to save each other. Unitarian Universalism asks us to ask the hard questions about the reality in which we live, and that by asking the hard questions, we not only come to know ourselves better, but we come to know others at a deeper level. Exploring our lives and learning about the lives of others at a deeper level can provide hope. A hope that one day all beings will find a way to walk this journey of life in peace without fear. So let us break through our self-imposed barriers, for love has no borders. I stand with love wherever I find those who are suffering. I stand with love wherever I find oppression. I stand with love wherever I find injustice. And I ask you to stand with me. And I will stand with you, and together we will shoulder this responsibility together. So I ask you, please stand with love, live with love in your heart, and act with love in all of your actions and everything that you do. Nothing less than the future of humanity is at stake. May it be so.